Okay, so the next chapter in here, part 2, is on bonding and attachment related articles. Some of these articles are geared more towards international adoption and older children, but a lot of them are good articles no matter if it's international or domestic. Because either way, you need to work towards attachment and bonding. Even if it's a domestic and the child comes home with you from the hospital, there was still 9 months in utero where they were attaching to another person. So attachment and bonding is very important despite what type of adoption you're pursuing. The first article in here is on parenthood after infertility. If a family has not struggled with infertility at all, I will just skip over this article and I'll be like, if you want to read it, you can in your own free time. But if they have struggled with infertility, we talk about this article. We go through the statistics. I think the statistic is there's 6 million women in the United States at any time struggling with infertility. So it's a large number and a large statistic in the United States. But it's so important that when a family decides to move from fertility treatments, if they sought them, to adoption, that they have taken time to kind of grieve that loss of not being able to have a child biologically. It's important that they have moved on from that and that they are together and like-minded in their decision, okay, we are going to be fully committed to our adoption now. There's some families that aren't fully committed. They're kind of still, you can tell they're still kind of struggling with the fertility issue and do we seek infertility treatments or what do we do? And that's fine, but we want to make sure they're fully committed to their adoption, that they're fully committed to this child, and moving on from the fertility issues. Okay. The next thing you'll see in your booklet is what is called the cycle of need. This can also be called the attachment cycle, but it is basically a delineation of how attachment occurs in children. So you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner, it says number 1, that's the first step in the attachment cycle, and that's that the child feels a need. It gives the example of being hungry here. So the child has a need. Second step is that stress increases. The child will cry because there is a need that needs to be met. I'm hungry, help me, come feed me. They'll express their need somehow. If it's a baby, it's through crying. If it's an older child, hopefully through telling you. And then the third step is that the need is met. So, mom or dad comes up and they feed the child, or mom and dad comes up and they change the child's diaper. That need is met, so the stress is immediately decreased as the need is satisfied. The fourth step is that there's a resolution. The child is realizing, when I have a need, I cried, mommy came, she met the need. They're starting to understand how this works and that their needs are being met. And this is a good time when bonding happens. So, as you're feeding the child, the infant, if it's an infant, having that eye contact while you bottle feed your infant. Brushing your child's hair, doing something, if they're having a tantrum, whatever the need is, having some playtime, having some bonding experience with them during that. And then the fifth step is that the child trusts that their needs will be met the next time. So you're developing that cycle of trust with your child that they're going to meet your needs. The reason that a lot of internationally adopted, not a lot, but the reason that some internationally adopted children struggle with attachment is because they do step 1 where they have a need, they do step 2 where they cry because they have a need, but that's where the cycle gets broken, because in an orphanage setting everything's done on a schedule. All the children are fed at the same time, all the children are changed at the same time. So the child's needs are not met when they cry. So you hear stories all the time of people going into orphanages with 100 kids, and it's dead silent. Because, I forget what the statistic is, but it's something like after a baby cries 30 times and no one comes, they just stop crying. Because there's no reason for them to cry because it doesn't get their needs met. So, there is that. The next article is on bonding, the development of emotional attachment. This is on how to form that emotional attachment with your child. And let me say that it is bonding and attachment is as equally important on the parent's part as it is on the child. We focus so much on the child and how you can help them bond to you and how you can help them attach to you, but it's equally important for the parents to bond and attach to the child because it's not an instantaneous thing. And I've even talked to some dads who've had biological children and have said, yes, it's been the same way with their biological children because they didn't carry the child for 9 months. So they don't have the bond that the mother does to the child. And so even sometimes with biological children and dads, sometimes they have to work towards that bond and that attachment. But it's just as important with adopted children on both parents' parts to work towards that bond and attachment. And to know that it's okay if you don't feel that initial movie moment where, fireworks happen and everything's great because you meet your child for the first time and you're immediately in love with them and attached to them. More often than not, it doesn't happen that way. So making the emotional attachment. A lot of these articles in this section will kind of say the same thing as far as the legitimate and tangible things you can do to increase your attachment. So some of the articles I'll go through less. But in order to foster that bond and attachment, the first step you can do is to limit introduction of new people. And this is really, really hard because you just brought this child home that you've worked for so long. Everyone's going to want to meet them. But you have to understand that the less people you introduce new people you introduce your child to, the less attachments they have to make at first, and the more they can focus on making an attachment with you. If their house is full of 50 people, they're not going to discern who they need to be going to for their needs to be met and who they need to rely on. And we tell families all the time, tell them your agency said you need to do this. Let us be the bad guys if you need to, but try to limit the introduction to new people. The second step is to practice being physically close with your child. Whatever that might be. If it's an infant, usually it's really easy because you're almost always holding the baby, feeding the baby, changing the baby's diaper. For older children, it's more difficult. But there's lots of games that you can do that are interactive and one-on-one. Whether it's doing a puzzle together or reading a book together, just making sure that you're touching the child, you have your hand on their back or they're sitting on your lap, or something like that to ensure that there's that physical touch and physical closeness. The third way is to increase your confidence as new parents. A great way to do this, of course, is reading books and reading articles. One, on parenting in general, but two, specifically on adoption-related parenting. The fourth way is try to duplicate former environments. Whenever you go to the orphanage or the foster home to pick up your child, learn as much as you can about what their environment is like and what their routine is like, and then try to mimic that in your home. Families want to make a nursery or make a bedroom for their child that has all these bright colors and is fun and tons of toys and stuff. But if they're used to a cinder block room with maybe 2 toys, then that's going to be completely overwhelming to them. So try to mimic their same setting as much as possible. Study each other's faces by face-to-face interaction. And this can be difficult with adopted kids, especially older ones. If they do have attachment issues, they're not going to want eye contact, and they're not going to want a lot of face-to-face interaction. But playing games or something like that, or having staring contests. For some reason, kids love staring contests. Doing things where you can have some face-to-face interaction. And then even tantrums can provide an opportunity to bond. We talk a lot about time ins and being there with your child when they're in trouble and not sending them to their room or not making them go stand in a corner and time out. I worked with one family that had, I think, 10 children. And they had a busy house. And you couldn't find a place to be by yourself. But they're in like the general living room where everyone would play and have fun. There was just a specific chair that was kind of set aside so that the child could have time to themselves, but was still with the rest of the family and not sent off by themselves. And that's where the children would go if they needed to decompress or be in a timeout situation. The next article is one that I am not going to go through, of course, specifically, because it has a gazillion different specific techniques that you can do to increase attachment. And it's great. Like it says, it breaks it up into categories. It has holding and touching, playing, feelings, education, heightening opportunities to nurture, clarification of life events, activities which highlight and promote identification with family, and discipline. So it goes through several different categories and gives specific ways that you can increase attachment. One thing we always like to point out with attachment related techniques, if it is something that is touch based, like maybe putting lotion on your child or them sitting on your lap or something, or massaging them if you do baby massage or something like that, or tickling, you need to be very aware if the child has had any sexual abuse in their past, because you're not wanting to bring up those similar feelings. So just be very cautious in knowing what your child's past is. Also know kind of what their threshold is for touch, because some kids, if they have struggled with attachment, they don't like touch, or if they have sensory issues, maybe they like a certain kind of touch. Like some kids like the deep pressure touch, and some kids like the light touch, rubbing the back or something like that. So learning what your child likes. Okay, the next article is bonding and attachment when it goes right. And I am not going to go through this one in detail, but then the next article after this one is bonding and attachment when it goes awry. So it kind of gives, and it goes through the different stages of life. So you'll see months 2 to 6, 6 to 7 months, 9 to 10 months, 10 to 18 months, 15 to 24 months. It goes through different life stages in there as far as bonding and attachment goes. The next article is on attachment disorder and what is attachment disorder. In this field, you hear the term RAD a lot, which is reactive attachment disorder. Reactive attachment disorder is when a child has the inability to make secure attachments with people. And a lot of times that is because they've had so many broken attachments in their life that they have never had the opportunity or learned how to make strong attachments. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to at some point. It just means it's going to take a lot of extra work for them to create attachments. One thing to keep in mind too is that attachment and a child's ability to attach is not based at all on what age the child was when the child came home. We've had children who came home at 9 months that have struggled with attachment issues. So the parents have had them since they were an infant, and the child has struggled with attachment issues. I've had a kid with RAD that came home at 9 months. So the age that the child comes home is not a determining factor necessarily on if they have an attachment issue or not. We've had kids come home at 5, 6 years and be fine with attachment. So generally, you see more attachment issues coming from children from colder societies, such as like Russia, Eastern Europe, those kind of countries where touch is not technically like a valued character trait. They're not more emotional societies, they're more cold. And then a lot of the children that come from warmer societies, such as like South America and Africa, struggle less a lot of times with attachment issues because, in Africa's one of those countries where they wear the babies on the back, so the baby's touching them 24/7. In Africa, a lot of times, I was reading a study and they said that a lot of African mothers will breastfeed their children like 20 times a day. They just do little spurts here and there. So those kind of cultures just emanate attachment and bonding stronger. So a lot of times, more of the attachment issues that we see are from the colder societies. The next article is on bonding and attachment in maltreated children. And this is a good article on providing educational information on bonding and attachment and what it looks like. So I'm not going to go through this one in specific detail, but it talks about, one of the things I did want to point out was the windows of opportunity and looking for windows of opportunity. In any relationship that you have to be intentional about showing love, and you have to be intentional about strengthening that relationship. Even more so with an adopted child, you have to be so intentional about looking for opportunities to bond with them, and looking for opportunities to build your attachment with them and strengthen that. The other thing I wanted to mention was at the bottom of the one page, you see a table that outlines the 4 different types of attachment: secure attachment, insecure avoidant, insecure resistant, and insecure disoriented. And of course, our goal is always to be securely attached to people and to have secure attachments. But a lot of people struggle with this, and not just adopted children. I mean, you have a lot of people in society that struggle with this. A couple of years ago, I had to take an attachment style survey myself. I was going through training, and they made each of us figure out what kind of attachment we were. And so they asked all these questions about your family of origin and your parents and what attachment was like in that. And at the end, she asked me, before I tell you what form of attachment you are, do you know what form of attachment you are? And I told her, I said, I am predisposed to be more avoidant because that's the kind of family I come from, where we don't hug a lot and tell each other we love each other a lot, and that's the kind of family I come from. I said, but I work really, really hard within my own family and my children and my husband to have secure attachment. And that's exactly what she said. She said that's exactly what I picked up on, that you are naturally geared more towards avoidant because of your family of origin, but that you seem to have a really secure attachment with your family. And so there are plenty of people that don't have secure attachments. And just because you grew up in one of the more insecure attachments doesn't mean you can't have secure attachments. You just have to work harder at having secure attachments. So it's important to know what type of attachment style you have as a parent, because that's going to be how you're attaching to your children. And then in turn, it's good to know what kind of attachment styles they have. Okay, I will go on to, and then the last page of that article I wanted to point out says, what specific problems can I expect to see in maltreated children with attachment problems? Talks about developmental delays, how a lot of times we see those, that it's not just kind of their physical development as a child, but it also comes into effect the bonding and the attachment they've had. Eating issues, we see a lot of eating issues with internationally adopted children, with hoarding food or hiding food, or making themselves sick because they're eating so much. And it goes back to kind of that trust issue and not knowing to trust that there's always going to be food available because that attachment cycle's been broken. Soothing behavior, a lot of kids that struggle with attachment have some kind of self-soothing. I had one little girl I worked with that would pull her hair out just constantly. We see kids that rock, that bang their heads on walls, that do something to self-soothe. Emotional functioning. A lot of children have, another word for this they say is indiscriminate attachment. A lot of kids will just go home with any Joe Schmo off the street because they don't have that strong attachment with their caregiver, their parent at that point. Inappropriate modeling. A lot of children have not been modeled how to appropriately interact with other children or adults. So a lot of maltreated children can struggle with this. Some will struggle with cruelty or aggression, especially if, again, that's been modeled to them or they have been a victim of that in their past. Then that is what they know. So, just a sidebar too, as you go through this with Families, I always encourage families at the beginning, like, hey, talk back with me. If you have any questions, say so. If you have a sidebar, say so. If you have any comments, throw it out there, because I don't like to hear myself talk for an hour and a half. So, the next article I'm going to skip over, but it's good for you to look over in your free time. It is from the TheraPlay Institute, and it is TheraPlay activities that you can do with young children that increase attachment and bonding. The next article is on how to help infants and toddlers that have attachment disorders, or just that are struggling with attachment in general. You know, as far as families go, we tell families, if you think there is something wrong as far as attachment goes with your child, don't wait to have it addressed. Address it as soon as you see an issue. We also tell families, if you don't see any attachment issues, if you feel like your child's doing great attachment-wise, you should still be doing these things, because you should still be promoting that attachment with them. So this, kind of like that other article, gives some tips that you can have as far as increasing attachment and bonding. Talks about wearing your baby, which is great if your baby is small enough to go in an ergo or any of those. Carrying your baby is great. We talked about this already, but ensuring that you are the caregiver for your child. If your child has a need, you're the one meeting it. We had one woman, she was a single mom, and she adopted a 2-year-old little girl, and so she was so pro-attachment. She did everything that she could, like everything in this book she did, because she wanted to ensure that attachment was strong. And so she had a bunch of family over one night for a big party, and her daughter knew, if you need to go to the bathroom, you come to me. If you need something to drink, you come to me. You have to ask me for these things. And she told all her family that too, like, hey, I need to be the primary caretaker. If she comes to you and says she needs to go to the bathroom, you send her to me. So making sure that you're the one meeting her needs so she can develop that trust. Keeping the bottle as long as possible. This is not something that is natural for American culture. We constantly are striving for our kids to meet the next developmental milestone and to hurry through those developmental milestones. But feeding your child is such a bonding experience. Even if your child gets off of the bottle and goes to a sippy cup, still maybe hold them while they're drinking their sippy cup. Have some kind of skin-to-skin contact with them to increase attachment. Bathing with your body, bathing with your baby, again, encourages skin-to-skin contact. But again, this is one of those things where if your child has any form of abuse in their past, this wouldn't be the greatest idea. You still bathe your baby, and have lots of touch within the bath time. You just need to be cautious of that. We already talked about this, but lots of face-to-face time. Holding them, the next little one, number 6, talks about if there's a great deal of anger or avoidance, hold them even if they don't want to be held. Having as much contact that you can physically with them is important. But also, and I always say this because this doesn't really mention this, but knowing what your child's triggers are, because some kids, touch can be a trigger for them, and so if you try to hold them, it's going to set them off. And that's fine. You just need to know that, and you need to know when to back away and give them space, and what they can take and what they can't. Okay. Baby massage is great. Rocking your baby. Sleeping, having your baby in a crib right next to your bed is great. Again, we in American society constantly try to get our kids to sleep in their room by themselves, away from us, because it's a good developmental milestone. But having your child there next to you in their crib is great for bonding and attachment. Singing together, just playful engagement in general is good. It has some expectations here. Expect a dirty house. Expect to be criticized and accused. I get this all the time in my family because they think that, we're not as strict with Silas, like as, my siblings who have biological children are with their kids. we very much follow the trust-based relational intervention techniques where we offer our kid options and compromises. And it's great because it totally delays a tantrum. And, he can be heading that way, and I can say, would you like a compromise? And he'll say, yeah. I'll give him a compromise, and I'll get what I want because he'll clean his room. He just had a say in it, too, and got to play for 2 or 3 more minutes before cleaning his room. But expect to be criticized and accused by people that might not understand attachment-based parenting as much. Have a great support system is really important, especially if you can have other families who have adopted and know what you're going through. Talk to attachment experts. There's several attachment therapists here in Louisville that are really good. Know you neither created your baby's problems nor can you cure them. It's a process. We can give you the tools and you can use the tools, but you can't take it personally upon yourself if your child is struggling. Pray a lot, of course, is important. Talks about preparing for your child. Help your baby get a transference object. So this is something that is coming with them. So maybe a blanket that they had in the orphanage, or a pacifier that they used in the orphanage, or we let Silas keep his bottle, even though it wasn't the greatest bottle. We let him keep it because that's what he was used to. A lot of times parents don't like this as much because whatever they had in the orphanage sometimes stinks really bad. If they had a blanket, it'll reek. But that smell helps them ease through their transition. So, okay, give some books there down at the bottom too that are good for building attachment and bonding. So.